No, 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 no. You are not a noob. Now, I know that that's a pretty strong title for a video, but I really want to talk about the sentiment behind it and not so much the term itself. Because whether you call yourself a noob, which is a fairly strong term, or you call yourself a beginner, or you're just saying like, I just got started so I don't know so much, all of that kind of self-doubt ultimately doesn't do you any good. So in this video, I want to continue just talking to the camera and talking a little bit about the learning process behind music production and honestly many other creative fields and non-creative fields. Of course, I'm going to be focusing on the music production part, and that is the examples that I'm going to be using, but it can be applied everywhere. And what I really want to cover today is those situations where you get somebody asking a question, somebody that is indeed just starting out their music production journey, and they immediately kind of feel the need to inform you about that they are just beginning and that they therefore likely won't understand what is actually going on with the problem that they're having, with the question that they're asking about music production, with whatever it is that they're talking about. Whenever it comes up with a conversation where people who are learning a skill actively say like, oh, I'm just starting out. I want to talk a little bit about the idea that all of those things really don't do you any good as a music producer when you are actually in the process of trying to learn music production. Now, I understand why people do this. Mostly, I think it is because people want a more simplified answer. They want to signal like, hey, I probably don't know as much as you do about the topic, so don't give me a very complex answer to this topic, which I can very much understand, but oftentimes I see it doing something else, and that is that they immediately put like a barrier in between the skill that they currently have and what they're trying to achieve. So say that you're a fan of music production and you're a big fan of Asterix's music, and you just post a question in my Discord, how do I get this one sound that Asterix uses in his tracks? Keep in mind, I'm a beginner, please keep it simple, that kind of thing. Now, obviously, this is a valid question, and it would even be valid to an extent to point out the fact that you are probably not as skilled as Asterix, who has been doing this stuff for over 20 years. But what I think happens oftentimes is that you kind of put, as I said, like a big barrier between you as a person and Asterix as the producer that you're looking up to. And one of the things that you forget in that moment, what usually happens is you start to think about it like, oh, this guy that I'm looking up to, he's so talented, he does all of this stuff and it always sounds good. One, you only hear the stuff that he does that he wants to release, right? You never really hear all of the ideas that failed, all of his musical ideas that he had that he didn't like and that he immediately discarded. You're never going to hear those. And two, you're creating this idea that you cannot really work up to that point, which is completely untrue. If you put in the work to learn something and you do that long enough, then you're eventually going to get good at that thing. That's just how humans work. The more we attempt a certain thing, the better we get at it. Because I can guarantee you that there was a point in Asterix's life where he didn't know what he was doing in regards to music production. He just couldn't produce a sidetracks track. And that was before he got started in music production. And really, this is going to be true for everybody that has ever started the skill and developed that further until they somehow become really good at it. At some point, they were just a beginner. At some point, they were just getting started. And truth be told, for 99% of the population, when they want to get good at something, they have to do it for a long time before they get good. There's very few people that can start out and immediately be very good at the skill. There's a reason why we call those people once-in-a-lifetime talents. In the very first year after I came to Italy when I was 16, I went with my father to a museum. We had a nice like father and son day out kind of thing, and we came to this museum, and in that museum was a person who was kind of like a blacksmith, but with copper. So he would have these copper plates around this size, and he would turn them into small objects, arrow points, small figurines. And when we were there, he was working on leaves. So we were watching him as within like a minute or so, he took just a copper sheet and just using a hammer and a chisel, he chiseled out this form of a leaf. And it actually looked like one. It had like a curled up stump for it, which would be like where it attached to the branch. It had like little lines on it showing off where the veins would be inside of this leaf, and it actually had the shape of a leaf. Of course, both of us were very amazed at how he was doing this, but then he started to explain his process. Like he would say, oh, I'm going to hit this place now because I want to create this. I want to hit that part like this so that it curls up in a certain way to form this way. Now, I didn't really try this, but I can imagine that after his explanation, if he handed me his tools, I could probably do quite a decent leaf if he helped me again, pointing me in some right directions and all of that kind of stuff, I could probably get a pretty decent leaf. It's not going to be as good as what he was making, but it's probably going to be good enough that people would say like, hey, that's a leaf made out of copper. And if that had happened, I would probably have gone home happily and say like, oh cool, I learned this new skill. I learned how to do this cool thing. I'm not as good as the guy that was doing it right there, but at least I learned how to do this skill. Now imagine the exact same story, but with a small twist. Actually, a slightly different projector. Imagine that 16-year-old projector that was standing there with his father actually wanted to, wait, this story can be better. Different projector obviously means different shirt. So imagine that projector that was standing there really wanted to become a blacksmith and work with copper himself. And imagine that I was just starting out trying to do that, and I come to this guy who is massively experienced, and I just see him doing it with much less difficulty than I would have if I were doing it myself. Knowing myself, if I had been in that situation where I wanted to learn this skill and I go to a place and there's this very experienced person doing it with much ease, and he then explains to me how simple it is to do the things that he is doing, what I think I would feel with myself is a little bit of annoyance, like at myself, of course not with the guy that is showing me how to do the thing that I want to do, but with myself in the sense that, oh, why didn't I come up with this earlier? It looks so easy when he does it. Why doesn't that work for me? Now, interestingly, the only thing between these two versions of the stories that actually has changed, that is actually different, is me. At the end of the day, whatever the blacksmith was doing didn't change. He just stood there, made his thing, and then explained to me how to make that thing. Also, my father didn't change. He was just standing next to me, enjoying his time. At the end of the day, the only thing that has really changed is my mindset going into that experience. There's one projector that is standing there and that is saying, oh, I just experienced this cool thing. This cool person made something cool. It looks really nice, and he explained to me how I did it and I understood it. So that was very, very interesting. And the other version of projector was standing there thinking, I can't believe it's this simple. It did it in a minute and it would take me an hour. Why is it so simple? Why am I not able to do this? Personally, I'd like to think that it's easier to conclude that the first projector is going to have a nicer time, leaving that experience, and maybe would even be more motivated to start learning that if he wanted to do so, than the second version of projector that was standing there with a lot of self-doubt in the moment where he was trying to maybe learn something about the thing that he was passionate about. Now, as you can imagine, the reason why I'm telling this story is because I see this in music production all the time. I do see it, however, with a few small twists to it. Of course, in the story, what happened is I was out and I was having a good time with my parents, so I wasn't really trying to improve this skill. Even if I were the second projector that at the time was actively trying to learn the skill, it wouldn't have been the right moment for me to actually learn that. So I can imagine that that second projector would come home, and by the time those frustrations have already sunk away. With music production though, what I see is often people ask questions when they are actually in the moment of trying to learn something. And that is obvious why. It's not something that you happen to come across on a field trip, music production, right? It's something that when you are actively trying to improve your music, you come across. The other twist that I sometimes see is that the self-doubt is already there from the very start of the learning process. That is why I showed that Discord message earlier, where one of the very first things that the user establishes is the fact that they are just new to doing this. I mean, imagine if this was the way that the second projector would have entered that shop and started the conversation about what the blacksmith was actually doing. I would never be able to make something like that. How do you do that? As you can imagine, it looks really strange to try to get information out of somebody, to try to learn something right after exclaiming the idea that you would never be able to do that. But as I said, that's not really the big problem. The more bigger problem is that self-doubts that you slowly and just a little bit put in your own mind that, okay, you are definitely different and you are definitely worse than this other person. And there's not really a way for you to get there. Now, obviously, there's always going to be moments of self-doubt. I've been making music for over a decade now, and I still have them on a weekly basis. So that is very natural. And I'm not really trying to make this video to get you into the idea that self-doubt never happens. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to at least give you a tool or a way that you can control when it happens. Because if there's one thing that I've learned in that decade of music production is that when it comes to when you want to learn something, self-doubt is probably the least helpful thing that you can do. The moments where you actually want to learn something, where you actually want to improve your skills are the moments where you need to be curious, not doubtful. So what I actually try to do, and this is something very interesting, is I try to kind of generate the moments of self-doubt when I'm not learning. And one of the ways that I do this is by listening to music when I'm working out, when I go rollerblading, or when I go out to get some groceries or stuff like that. That is when I mostly listen to professional music, outside of the half an hour to an hour that I do every morning to warm up my ears. But usually those moments when you're not directly like learning music production, when you're not actively trying to improve your skill, those are the moments where self-doubt is a little bit nicer to deal with, I would say. If you're just out and about and you have that moment of like, oh, I really like this cool synth and this track that I'm hearing. I wonder how it's made. I would never be able to make something like that. This is either completely out of my style or completely out of my skill, whatever it may be. Those are the moments where you can have that little bit of self-doubt. And then when you get on back to the studio, that moment has passed and you can just get back into making music for just the fun of it without actually having to doubt the skill that you're putting into creating the music that you're making. And as a consequence, anytime that I'm watching a tutorial, I don't think to myself, oh, that's an amazing trick. Why didn't I come up with that? I just think that first part. I just think, oh, this is an amazing trick. I'm going to use it. And that's the end of the thinking that I do about just what I'm learning. So that's the thing that I want to talk about. This was a little bit more of a difficult video. I actually scripted this whole video and I basically discussed everything in a completely different way than I originally scripted it. I mean, it's the same story and the same flow of the video, but everything was different. And that is because I find it really hard to talk about these things. And even when I wrote down what I was trying to say, when it actually came to saying it, it often just didn't feel right. What I want to end on saying is that obviously this is my experience and I'm able to do it my way, but that may not work for you. Talking about feelings and how everybody handles them is really difficult because everybody does it differently. So for me, as I said, I've been able to somewhat control the self-doubt that comes to mind when I'm listening to other people's music by just separating that process from actually learning music production, at least as much as it's possible. Of course, I still, as I said, have the morning part, and there's sometimes a moment where I'm like, oh, I wonder if I could ever do something like this. I wonder if I could ever do something like that. The way that everybody is going to handle that feeling of self-doubt is going to be different than the way that I do it. What I want to mainly do is just show you and point you to the negatives that self-doubt can have if you have it at the moment where you're actually trying to improve that. At the end of the day, I think it does nothing but just get in the way of your end goal, which is to actually improve yourself. So that's it. That is everything that I want to talk about. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope that this stuff is useful for you. Let me know if it is by leaving a like and make sure that you subscribe to the channel. Also, you can turn on bell notifications if you want to be notified when I upload something. Another way to support the channel is by becoming a patron. That way you can support me financially, which is of course extremely helpful. So if you're interested in that, there should be a card up on the end cards right now that you can click to go to my Patreon page. But that's it. Thanks for watching and bye bye.